The morning mist hung heavy over Hong Kong's Victoria Harbor as Commodore George Dewey stood on the deck of his flagship, the USS Olympia, watching the last of his squadron's coal being loaded. It was April 25, 1898, and the United States had just declared war on Spain. The air crackled with tension as sailors hurried about their duties. Knowing they were about to embark on a mission that would either make them heroes or consign them to the depths of the South China Sea, Dewey had received his orders from Assistant Secretary of the Navy Theodore Roosevelt weeks earlier. In the event of declaration of war Spain, your duty will be to see that the Spanish squadron does not leave the Asiatic station, and then offensive operations in Philippine Islands. The words echoed in his mind as he surveyed his small but determined fleet. 6 warships against the entire Spanish Pacific Squadron. The odds seemed daunting. But Dewey had spent months preparing for this moment. The Commodore was a veteran of the Civil War, a man who had learned his trade under Admiral David Farragut at the Battle of New Orleans. 60 years old, his weathered face bore the marks of decades at sea, but his eyes still burned with the fire of ambition. He knew that success in the Philippines could catapult America onto the world stage as a major naval power, while failure would leave the nation humiliated, vulnerable in the Pacific. According to contemporary reports from the New York Herald, Dewey's Asiatic squadron consisted of the protected cruiser Olympia, the cruisers Baltimore, Raleigh, and Boston, the gunboat Concord, and the revenue cutter McCulloch. The Spanish fleet, commanded by Admiral Patricio Montoya y Pasaron, was anchored in Manila Bay with 7 major vessels, including the cruisers Reina, Cristina, and Castilla, supported by several smaller gunboats and the protection of coastal fortifications. As the squadron prepared to depart Hong Kong, Dewey gathered his captains for a final briefing. The wardroom of the Olympia was thick with cigar smoke and nervous energy as he outlined their approach. They would steam directly to Manila Bay under cover of darkness, engaging the Spanish fleet at dawn. "Gentlemen," Dewey declared, his voice steady despite the magnitude of their undertaking, "we sail not just for victory, but for America's future in the Pacific." The intelligence reports painted a grim picture of Spanish defenses. Manila Bay was protected by the ancient fortress of Corregidor and several modern gun batteries. The Spanish fleet, while older than the American ships, was familiar with local waters and fighting on home ground. Moreover, Admiral Montoya was an experienced commander who had spent years in Philippine waters, knowing every current and shoal that might trap an unwary enemy. Captain Charles Gridley of the Olympia studied the charts one final time, tracing the narrow entrance to Manila Bay with his finger. "It's a bottleneck, sir," he observed to Dewey. "If they catch us in that channel, ... He didn't need to finish the sentence. Every man in the room understood that entering Manila Bay would be like sailing into a trap, with Spanish guns commanding the heights on either side of the entrance. But Dewey had made his decision. America needed this victory to establish its presence in Asia and prove its naval capabilities to the world. The Spanish-American War had begun with the mysterious explosion of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor. But it would be decided by actions like this one, bold strikes that demonstrated its American resolve and capability far from home waters. As night fell over Hong Kong, the American squadron slipped its moorings and began the 600-mile journey to the Philippines. The die had been cast, and within days, the fate of 2 empires would be decided in the tropical waters of Manila Bay. The USS Olympia cut through the dark waters of the South China Sea like a steel phantom, her engines maintaining a steady rhythm that vibrated through every rivet and beam. It was the night of April 30th to May 1st, 1898, and Commodore Dewey's squadron was approaching its moment of destiny. The 6 American warships moved in single file through the tropical darkness, their crews at battle stations. Every man knowing that dawn would bring either glory or death, Dewey stood on the bridge of his flagship, occasionally checking his pocket watch by the dim light of a shielded lantern. They were making excellent time, and if his calculations were correct, they would reach the entrance to Manila Bay just before midnight. The Commodore had chosen this timing deliberately. The Spanish would be least prepared for an assault during the darkest hours, and his ships could slip past the coastal fortifications. While most of the enemy slept, the plan was audacious in its simplicity. Rather than bombarding the shore batteries from a safe distance, Dewey intended to steam directly past them in the darkness, accepting whatever punishment the Spanish guns might inflict in exchange for reaching the Spanish fleet at anchor. It was a strategy that required perfect timing, steady nerves, and more than a little luck. One miscalculation, one Spanish searchlight at the wrong moment, and the entire squadron could be trapped in the narrow channel leading to Manila Bay. As they approached Corregidor Island, the ancient Spanish fortress that guarded the bay's entrance, tension aboard the American ships reached fever pitch. Sailors crouched beside their guns, sweat beading on their faces despite the cool night air. In the engine rooms, stokers fed coal into the furnaces with mechanical precision. Knowing that their ships' lives might depend on maintaining full steam, Lieutenant Thomas Brumby, serving as Dewey's flag lieutenant, later recorded in his journal, "The eerie silence that fell over the squadron as they passed Corregidor. The night was perfectly still," he wrote, "broken only by the rhythmic churning of our screws and the distant sound of surf against the rocky shores. Every man held his breath, waiting for the flash of Spanish guns that would announce our presence." To the enemy, the first ship to enter the channel was the Olympia, followed closely by the Baltimore, Raleigh, Boston, Concord, and finally the McCulloch. As they approached the narrowest part of the passage, lookouts strained their eyes for any sign of Spanish activity. The fortress of Corregidor loomed like a sleeping giant in the darkness, its ancient stone walls hiding modern artillery that could devastate the American column if given the chance. Suddenly, a flash of light cut through the darkness from Frail Island, followed by the thunder of a large-caliber gun. A Spanish sentry had spotted the intruders and opened fire. The shells screamed overhead, splashing harmlessly into the sea beyond the American formation, but the damage was done. Their presence was known. Within minutes, more guns joined the chorus, sending shells whistling through the night air around the advancing American ships. Dewey's response was immediate and characteristic. "Don't return the fire," he ordered his captains by signal lamp. "Maintain course and speed." The Commodore knew that stopping to engage the shore batteries would give the Spanish fleet time to prepare and might alert other defensive positions throughout the bay. Better to accept whatever damage the coastal guns might inflict and press on toward the main objective. The passage seemed to last an eternity, though in reality, the American squadron cleared the entrance to Manila Bay in less than an hour. They emerged into the broader waters beyond. Dewey allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The most dangerous part of their approach was behind them, and Spanish gunfire had caused no significant damage. Now they faced a different challenge, finding and engaging Admiral Montoyo's fleet in the pre-dawn darkness. According to intelligence reports, the Spanish squadron was anchored near Cavite, on the southern shore of Manila Bay. Dewey ordered his ships to form a battle line and steam slowly toward that position, their crews remaining at general quarters. In a few short hours, the sun would rise over the Philippines, and with it would come one of the most decisive naval battles in American history. The first pale light of May 1st, 1898, crept across Manila Bay like a curtain, being slowly drawn back to reveal the stage for one of history's most decisive naval encounters. Commodore Dewey stood on the bridge of the USS Olympia, his binoculars trained on the misty waters ahead where intelligence reports suggested the Spanish fleet lay at anchor. The tension among his crew was palpable. Months of preparation and a dangerous midnight passage had led to this moment. As the tropical dawn strengthened, the silhouettes of Spanish warships gradually became visible through the morning haze. Admiral Patricio Montoyo Y. Passeron had positioned his squadron in a defensive line near the Cavite Naval Yard, with his flagship, the cruiser Reina Cristina, prominently displayed at the center of the formation. The Spanish commander had chosen his position carefully, placing his ships where they could be supported by the shore batteries of Cavite while maintaining room to maneuver. Dewey studied the enemy formation through his glasses, noting the positions of each Spanish vessel. Besides the Reina Cristina, he could identify the cruiser Castilla, the gunboats Don Antonio de Ulloa, Don Juan de Austria, Isla de Luzon, and Isla de Cuba, along with several smaller craft. It was a respectable force, But the American Commodore felt confident in his ship's superior firepower and the training of his crews. At precisely 5:53 in the morning, the Spanish shore batteries opened fire, their shells sending up towering waterspouts around the approaching American squadron. The battle had begun, but Dewey maintained his deliberate approach, refusing to be drawn into a long-range artillery duel with the coastal defenses. His target was the Spanish fleet, and everything else was merely a distraction from that primary objective. The American formation was a masterpiece of naval tactics, with the Olympia leading the line, followed by the Baltimore, Raleigh, Boston, Concord, and McCulloch in precise order. Each captain knew his role and position, the result of countless hours of drill and preparation during their time in Hong Kong. Now, the Spanish shells began to fall with increasing accuracy around their ships. That training would be put to the ultimate test, as reported in Harper's Weekly. The moment that defined the battle came at 5:59. When Dewey turned to Captain Charles Gridley and spoke the words that would echo through American naval history, "You may fire when you are ready, Gridley." The Olympia's forward 8-inch guns roared in response,
Ow.
sending the first American shells screaming toward the Spanish line. The Battle of Manila Bay had begun in earnest. The American squadron executed a series of precise maneuvers, steaming parallel to the Spanish line while maintaining a devastating fire from their main batteries. The tactical advantage was immediately apparent. The American ships were not only better armed, but also more maneuverable than their Spanish counterparts. Admiral Montoyo's vessels, many of which were anchored or restricted by shallow water, could only respond with limited return fire. The Reina Cristina, flying Admiral Montoyo's flag, became the focus of American attention. The Olympia and Baltimore crashed into the Spanish flagship, starting fires and causing terrible casualties among her crew. The Spanish admiral showed remarkable courage, attempting to lead his ship in a desperate attack on the American line. But the Reina Cristina was forced to retreat after suffering devastating damage. Within the first hour of combat, it became clear that the Spanish fleet was outmatched. The Castilla, an unprotected cruiser that had been converted from a merchant vessel, was taking severe punishment from American guns. Her wooden hull, despite being protected by iron plating, proved no match for the high explosive shells that rained down upon her. Fires broke out along her length, and she began to list heavily to starboard. The smaller Spanish gunboats fared no better. The Don Antonio de Ulloa was hit repeatedly, her thin armor providing little protection against American firepower. Isla de Luzon and Isla de Cuba, brave as their crews were, simply lacked the weapons and protection to engage effectively with modern American cruisers. One by one they began to withdraw toward the protection of the Cavite shore batteries. But even there, they found little sanctuary. At 7:35 in the morning, after less than 2 hours of combat, Dewey received a disturbing report from his ammunition officers. The Olympia was running dangerously low on 5-inch shells, and several other ships were reporting similar supply issues. The Commodore faced a critical decision: continue the engagement and risk running out of ammunition entirely, or withdraw temporarily to assess the situation and redistribute supplies among his squadron. Dewey chose the prudent course, signaling his ships to withdraw to the center of Manila Bay for what he announced as a breakfast break. The decision puzzled many of his officers, but the Commodore used the respite to redistribute ammunition and assess the damage to both fleets. What he saw through his binoculars filled him with satisfaction. The Spanish squadron was clearly beaten, with several ships aground or burning fiercely. The brief respite in the middle of Manila Bay gave Commodore Dewey's crews time to redistribute ammunition and assess their remarkable situation. As the American sailors consumed a quick breakfast and tended to their guns, the reality of their achievement began to sink in. In less than 3 hours of fighting, they had effectively destroyed Spanish naval power in the Pacific, suffering only minor casualties and negligible damage to their own ships. Admiral Montoyo, aboard his battered flagship, Reina Cristina, faced a desperate situation. His ship was listing heavily. Fires raged throughout her hull, and casualties mounted by the minute. The Spanish admiral had shown tremendous personal courage, at one point attempting to ram the American line in a final desperate gesture, but His obsolete vessels simply could not match the firepower and technology of Dewey's modern squadron. At 10:40 in the morning, Dewey signaled his ships to resume the attack. The American line reformed and steamed once again toward the remnants of the Spanish fleet, which had retreated as close to the shore batteries as possible. What followed was not so much a battle as a systematic destruction of an already defeated enemy. The Spanish ships, many of them aground and unable to maneuver, could only endure the methodical pounding of American guns. The Castilla, which had been severely damaged in the morning engagement, was the first to succumb. American shells had started uncontrollable fires throughout her wooden hull, and her crew was forced to abandon ship as she settled into the shallow waters near Cavite. The sight of the proud Spanish cruiser burning and sinking sent a clear message. To the remaining defenders, resistance was futile. The smaller Spanish vessels met similar fates in rapid succession. The Don Antonio de Ulloa, despite the heroic efforts of her crew, was pounded into submission by concentrated fire from multiple American ships. The Isla de Luzon and Isla de Cuba, their thin armor pierced by repeated hits, were forced to beach themselves to prevent complete destruction. The Don Juan de Austria managed to escape temporarily, but she too would eventually be hunted down and destroyed. According to contemporary accounts in the London Times, the most dramatic moment of the resumed battle came when Admiral Montoyo, realizing that further resistance would only result in unnecessary casualties, ordered his flag transferred from the burning Reina Cristina to the Isla de Cuba. The Spanish admiral's personal courage throughout the engagement had been unquestionable, but tactical realities could not be ignored. His fleet was finished as an effective fighting force. The shore batteries at Cavite continued to fire sporadically at the American squadron, but their efforts were largely ineffective. Dewey's ships maintained their distance while systematically destroying the Spanish vessels, and the coastal guns lacked the range and accuracy to cause significant damage. Moreover, many of the Spanish gunners had been demoralized by the complete destruction of their fleet and were beginning to abandon their positions. By noon, the battle was effectively over. The Spanish Pacific Squadron had been completely destroyed, with not a single vessel remaining in fighting condition. The Reina Cristina was a burning wreck, the Castilla had sunk, and the surviving gunboats were either beached or had struck their colors in surrender. American casualties were remarkably light, only 7 men wounded across the entire squadron. With no fatalities reported, the strategic implications of Dewey's victory were immediately apparent to observers on both sides. Spain had lost its ability to defend the Philippines, opening the entire archipelago to American occupation. More importantly, the United States had announced its arrival as a major naval power in the Pacific, capable of projecting force thousands of miles from its home bases. Dewey's tactical execution had been flawless. His decision to steam past the shore batteries in darkness, his careful positioning during the battle, and his methodical destruction of the Spanish fleet demonstrated the highest levels of naval professionalism. The Commodore had not only won a complete victory, but had done so with minimal losses, preserving his squadron for the larger strategic objectives that would follow. As the smoke cleared over Manila Bay, Dewey found himself in control of one of the most important harbors in the Pacific. The Spanish flag no longer flew over any warship in the bay, and the coastal defenses had been largely silenced. But the Commodore knew that his victory, decisive as it was, represented only the beginning of America's involvement in the Philippines. The real challenges lay ahead, occupying and governing a territory thousands of miles from home, populated by people who had their own ideas about independence and self-governance. The silence that fell over Manila Bay in the early afternoon of May 1st, 1898, was profound and unsettling. Where hours before the air had been filled with the thunder of naval guns and the screech of flying steel, now only the gentle lapping of waves against ship hulls and the distant crackling of fires aboard wrecked Spanish vessels broke the tropical quiet. Commodore George Dewey stood on the bridge of the USS Olympia, surveying a scene of complete and total victory that exceeded even his most optimistic expectations. The statistics of the battle were staggering in their one-sidedness. The Spanish Pacific Squadron had been utterly annihilated, 7 major warships destroyed or captured, with hundreds of Spanish sailors killed or wounded. In contrast, the American Asiatic Squadron had suffered only 8 men wounded and no fatalities. Not a single American vessel had been seriously damaged, and Dewey's ships retained their full fighting capability. It was, by any measure, one of the most lopsided naval victories in modern history. Admiral Patricio Montoyo, Y. Passeron, his flagship in ruins and his fleet destroyed, faced the bitter reality of complete defeat. The Spanish commander had fought with personal courage and professional competence, but obsolete ships and inadequate resources had doomed his efforts from the start. As he transferred his flag for the final time to a small gunboat, Montoyo knew that his career was finished and that Spain's centuries-old empire in the Pacific had effectively ended with the sunrise. The immediate tactical situation following the battle presented Dewey with both opportunities and challenges. He now controlled Manila Bay, one of the finest natural harbors in the Pacific, but his squadron was thousands of miles from the nearest American base. His ships needed coal, supplies, and eventually reinforcement if they were to hold their position against any Spanish attempt to reclaim the Philippines. Moreover, the Commodore had no ground forces to occupy Manila or the surrounding territory. Within hours of the battle's conclusion, Dewey sent a cable to Washington that would electrify the American public and fundamentally alter the nation's strategic position. The squadron under my command, he reported, has destroyed the Spanish fleet in Manila Bay and taken control of the naval station at Cavite. It controls the bay completely and can take the city at any time, but I have insufficient men to hold territory. The message, when it reached the United States, transformed Dewey overnight from an obscure naval officer into a national hero. According to reports in the Chicago Tribune, news of Dewey's victory reached the United States on May 7th. After the cable had been relayed through Hong Kong and across the Pacific, the American public, which had been following the war with Spain, primarily through events in Cuba and the Caribbean, suddenly found their nation in possession of strategic territory on the other side of the world. The implications were staggering. America had become a Pacific power almost overnight. The Spanish authorities in Manila found themselves in an impossible position. Governor-General Basilio Agustin de Villa had lost his naval defense and faced the prospect of American occupation with only limited ground forces at his disposal. The city's fortifications, designed primarily to control the local population rather than repel foreign invasion, were inadequate to resist a determined assault by modern warships. Moreover, Dewey's control of the harbor meant that Spanish reinforcements could not reach the Philippines by sea. Filipino revolutionaries, led by Emilio Aguinaldo, saw Dewey's victory as an opportunity to advance their own cause for independence. The insurgents had been fighting Spanish colonial rule for years. The destruction of Spanish naval power seemed to offer the possibility of final victory over their colonial masters. However, Aguinaldo and his followers would soon discover that American intentions regarding Philippine independence were far from clear. The international implications of the Battle of Manila extended far beyond the immediate theater of operations. European powers, particularly Germany and Britain, watched with keen interest as the United States demonstrated its ability to project naval power across the Pacific. The balance of power in East Asia, long dominated by European colonial empires and a modernizing Japan, now included a new and potentially powerful American presence. Dewey himself understood the larger significance of his victory, but he also recognized the practical challenges that lay ahead. His squadron needed immediate logistical support, and the Commodore began organizing supply lines through Hong Kong and other neutral ports. He also opened communications with Filipino revolutionary leaders, though he carefully avoided making any commitments regarding American policy toward Philippine independence. The Spanish government in Madrid, reeling from the news of their Pacific fleet's destruction, faced a strategic disaster of the first magnitude. The loss of the Philippines seemed inevitable, and with it would go one of Spain's oldest and most valuable colonial possessions. The defeat at Manila Bay, combined with American successes in the Caribbean, made it clear that Spain could not hope to win the war against the United States. As May 1st drew to a close, Commodore Dewey could look back on a day that had changed the course of history. In a single morning's work, he had established American naval supremacy in the Pacific, opened the Philippines to American occupation, and announced to the world that the United States had arrived as a global power. The age of American isolationism was ending. The era of American empire was about to begin. The news of Commodore Dewey's stunning victory at Manila Bay rippled across the world's capitals like shockwaves from an earthquake, fundamentally altering perceptions of American naval power and global strategic balance. In the ornate chambers of European foreign ministries, seasoned diplomats who had dismissed the United States as a regional power suddenly found themselves recalculating the equations of international influence. The destruction of an entire Spanish squadron by an American force operating thousands of miles from home demonstrated capabilities that few had imagined the young republic possessed. In London, the British Admiralty studied reports of the battle with particular interest. Lord George Hamilton, the First Lord of the Admiralty, convened emergency meetings to assess the implications of America's newfound Pacific presence. British naval officers had long respected American industrial capacity, but the tactical execution displayed by Dewey's squadron suggested a level of professional competence that commanded serious attention. The Royal Navy, accustomed to thinking of itself as the world's dominant naval force, now faced the prospect of sharing the Pacific with an increasingly capable American fleet. Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany viewed the American victory with a mixture of admiration and concern. German colonial ambitions in the Pacific had been growing steadily, and the presence of a powerful American squadron in Philippine waters complicated Berlin's expansionist plans. Within days of receiving news from Manila Bay, the Kaiser ordered additional German warships to East Asian waters, ostensibly to protect German commercial interests, but actually to monitor American activities and assert German presence in the region. The reaction in Tokyo was perhaps the most significant of all. Japanese leaders, in the midst of their own rapid modernization and expansion, recognized immediately that America's entry into Pacific power politics would affect their strategic calculations. The Meiji government had been carefully building its naval capabilities with an eye toward challenging European colonial dominance in Asia. Now, they faced the prospect of American competition in what they increasingly viewed as their natural sphere of influence. French colonial administrators in Indochina watched events in the Philippines with nervous attention. The speed and completeness of Dewey's victory demonstrated that European colonial possessions in Asia might be more vulnerable than previously assumed. If Spain, with centuries of colonial experience and established naval bases, could lose the Philippines so quickly and decisively, what did that suggest about the security of other European territories in the region? According to contemporary analysis in Le Figaro, European observers were particularly struck by the technological and tactical superiority demonstrated by the American squadron. Dewey's ships had not only outgunned their Spanish opponents, but had also shown superior seamanship, gunnery, and tactical coordination. This suggested that American naval development had progressed far beyond what most European experts had realized. In St. Petersburg, Russian naval planners studying reports from Manila Bay began to reconsider their own Pacific strategy. Railway was still under construction, and Russian naval forces in the Pacific remained limited. The sudden appearance of a powerful American presence in Philippine waters meant that Russia's expansion into East Asia would now face potential opposition. From an unexpected quarter, the Spanish reaction naturally was one of shock and dismay. In Madrid, the government of Praxedes Mateo Sagasta faced the harsh reality that the empire built over 4 centuries was crumbling with stunning rapidity. The loss of the Pacific Squadron meant that the Philippines could not be defended, and Spanish colonial authorities throughout the archipelago began preparing for the inevitable American occupation. Back in the United States, the victory at Manila Bay triggered a wave of national euphoria unlike anything seen since the Civil War. Dewey became an instant hero, his name appearing in newspaper headlines from coast to coast. Songs were written about the Commodore. His image appeared on everything from coffee cups to cigar boxes. And communities across America began organizing parades to celebrate the victory. The battle had given Americans their first taste of global military success, and had awakened appetites for international influence that would reshape the nation's destiny. President Iwo McKinley found himself facing strategic decisions of unprecedented complexity. The victory at Manila Bay had given America control of the Philippines, but what should be done with this unexpected acquisition? McKinley's administration had entered the war with Spain primarily to resolve the Cuban situation. They had not anticipated finding themselves responsible for governing millions of Filipinos on the other side of the world. The strategic implications extended far beyond the immediate theater of operations. Control of Manila Bay gave the United States a major naval base in the heart of East Asia. It's positioned perfectly to influence trade routes between Asia and the Americas. American merchants and industrialists quickly recognized the commercial possibilities, while naval strategists understood the military advantages of having a forward base so far from American shores. As reports of the battle circulated through diplomatic channels, it became clear that May 1st, 1898, marked a fundamental turning point in global power relationships. The United States had announced its arrival as a world power in the most dramatic fashion possible, and the other great powers would now be forced to adjust their strategies accordingly. The age of American global influence had begun with the thunder of guns in Manila Bay, the setting sun on May 1st. 1898 painted Manila Bay in shades of gold and crimson, its serene beauty standing in stark contrast to the smoking wrecks of Spanish warships scattered along the shoreline. As Commodore George Dewey stood on the deck of his flagship USS Olympia, watching the last flames flicker from the ruins of Admiral Montoyo's squadron, he could hardly have imagined the full magnitude of what his morning's work had accomplished. The Battle of Manila Bay had lasted less than 7 hours, but its consequences would reshape the Pacific world for generations to come. In the immediate aftermath, Dewey's victory solved the tactical problem of Spanish naval power in the Pacific, but it created strategic challenges that would test American leadership for decades. The United States now possessed the Philippines, sprawling archipelago of over 7,000 islands populated by millions of people with their own cultures, languages, and political aspirations. The question of what to do with this unexpected acquisition would dominate American politics for years and fundamentally alter the nation's relationship with the world. The battle's impact on naval warfare and tactics was equally profound. Dewey's systematic destruction of the Spanish fleet demonstrated the decisive advantage of modern steel warships over older wooden and iron vessels. The engagement proved that superior technology, combined with rigorous training and tactical skill, could overcome numerical disadvantages and even the benefits of fighting in home waters. Naval colleges around the world would study the Battle of Manila Bay for decades, analyzing every aspect of Dewey's approach and execution. The human cost of the victory, while remarkably light on the American side, was substantial for Spain and the Philippines. Hundreds of Spanish sailors lost their lives in defense of their empire, displaying courage that their enemies recognized and respected. More significantly, the battle opened the Philippines to American occupation, beginning a colonial relationship that would profoundly affect Filipino society and ultimately lead to decades of conflict and negotiation over independence. Dewey himself became one of America's first modern military heroes, his fame transcending regional and political boundaries in ways that few figures had achieved since George Washington. Congress promoted him to the rank of Admiral of the Navy, a rank created specifically for him and never held by anyone else in American history. His success at Manila Bay launched him into consideration for the presidency, though he ultimately declined to pursue political office, preferring to remain focused on naval affairs. The international ramifications of the battle continued to unfold throughout the following decades. America's acquisition of the Philippines brought the United States into direct contact with Asian politics and forced American leaders to develop policies regarding China, Japan, and the other regional powers. The open-door policy toward China, the development of Pearl Harbor as a major naval base, and eventually America's involvement in 2 Pacific Wars all traced their origins, at least partially, to that May morning in Manila Bay. For Spain, the defeat marked the effective end of its colonial empire and its status as a global power. The loss of the Philippines, combined with defeats in Cuba and Puerto Rico, forced Spain to confront the reality that its centuries of imperial dominance were over. The Spanish-American War transformed Spain from a colonial empire into a European middle power, a transformation that would influence Spanish politics and society well into the 20th century. The Filipino people found themselves caught between the end of one colonial relationship and the beginning of another. While many initially welcomed American forces as liberators from Spanish rule, it quickly became apparent that the United States intended to govern the Philippines as a colony rather than grant immediate independence. The resulting Philippine-American War would prove longer and more costly than the Spanish-American War itself, demonstrating that military victory was only the beginning of America's imperial challenges. According to historical analysis published in the Naval War College Review decades later, the Battle of Manila Bay represented a watershed moment in American strategic thinking. Prior to 1898, the United States had been primarily concerned with continental expansion and hemispheric defense. After Dewey's victory, American leaders began thinking in truly global terms, developing strategies for projecting power across oceans and maintaining influence in distant regions. The technological lessons of the battle influenced naval development worldwide, the effectiveness of modern naval gunnery, the importance of superior communications, and the value of systematic training, all became accepted principles that navies around the world incorporated into their development programs. The battle helped establish the template for 20th century naval warfare that would reach its culmination in the great fleet actions of two world wars. As the years passed and the immediate excitement of victory faded, historians and strategists began to recognize the Battle of Manila Bay as one of those rare military engagements that truly changed the course of history. In the space of a single morning, Commodore Dewey had not only destroyed an enemy fleet, but had also announced America's emergence as a global power, reshaped the strategic balance in the Pacific, and set in motion events that would influence international relations for generations. The legacy of that stunning victory continues to resonate today, reminding us that decisive action by relatively small forces can have consequences far beyond their immediate military objectives. The thunder of guns in Manila Bay on May 1st, 1898, marked not just the end of Spanish power in the Pacific, but the beginning of the American century that would follow.